Welcome. I'm Nancy Gutierrez. I'm coordinator of parent community engagement for Torrance Unified School District.
And I am Antoinette Laiolo, coordinator of psychology and counseling for Torrance Unified School District. Thank you so much for joining us.
So today we have our Building Bridges parent workshop on substance use and peer pressure. We are recording it, so it will be available online at our parent engagement website. So we will go ahead and get started and provide you some information this hour that hopefully will be useful for you. Now, what we will be doing is providing you some information about decision making and how teens and adolescents go about it as well. Also, then we will be going over what peer pressure actually looks like. We will be providing you some good information on substance use, and then we will provide you with some hopefully useful tips on how you can deal with peer pressure and support your students in dealing with peer pressure in their own lives. And of course, we will never leave you without some resources that may be helpful for you to reach out to or have in your back pocket for future use or for anybody else that you're aware of who may need the resources. So as we will get started, we just wanted to provide you with a short little introduction video that provides you a little introduction on what peer pressure looks like and how prevalent it actually is for people of all ages. So it's not just students that get affected by it, but also it gives you a good visual and examples. So we will go ahead and try and play this for you so that you can have an idea as we start our conversation about decision-making and peer pressure.
What if we told you that you could get people to say and do things that they didn't agree with?
Sounds good.
To agree to things that they knew were wrong.
Like it.
And in the process, lower the quality of their lives and the lives of others around them, sometimes even catastrophically so.
All right, now you got me. It sounds terrifying, doesn't it? But the fact of the matter is, it happens every day. In fact, you do it every day, and you're subject to it every day.
The best way to understand a phenomenon like this is to try to recreate it in a laboratory.
What we're about to show you is a very simple experiment inspired by renowned social psychologist Solomon Asch, and it will reveal this shockingly common form of mind control.
We sat 7 teenagers around a table and asked each in turn to answer a very simple question.
Which of the 3 lines does this object match in length? Now, it was obviously line C.
Now here's the intervention, the trick we're testing with this experiment.
The first teenagers are Confederates. They're in on it. And they were instructed to give the wrong answer, A.
This answer was so obviously wrong. But what would the actual person who was not in on it, the one the experiment was designed to observe, what would they say?
Any questions? A.
He gave the obviously wrong answer. What a pushover!
Well, a pushover, but in good company. The surprise here is he's not the exception, he's the rule. About 2/3 of any group, independent of age, goes along. Regardless of gender, background, most of us are suckers. Social influence is a potent power. So here we have a textbook example of this deceptively simple form of mind control. We got these teenagers to consciously ignore what they knew to be right.
And we could have gotten 2/3 of you. Remember, so don't think you're above it.
Oh, not at all. In real life, think of how many smart people have made stupid decisions because social forces overwhelmed their better judgment.
There are benefits to following the crowd. Relying on group wisdom is cognitively efficient.
And often cognitively superior. We are social learners and derive great benefit by leaning on the judgment of others. Even when a subject spoke their mind, it was torture to do it. Watch this girl's face. Social influence is a powerful thing.
C.
So the question becomes, can we get more of the benefits and fewer of the costs?
What if we replayed the same scenario with the teenagers and added one person, just one, who expresses polite doubt to the crowd?
I guess I saw it different because looks like it was C to me.
Maybe I saw it differently, but I think it's C.
I might see it differently, but I think it's C.
C. What about you? C.
C. C.
C. C.
C.
C.
C.
Astounding! 95% now express their true opinions.
So here's some BS you can use. What's the point here?
It's the power of one. We have an innate fear of being shunned by valued groups. When you feel like you're the odd person out, don't stifle your concerns. Simply express them respectfully. It turns out this small dissent can provide powerful permission to the silent concerns of others.
Yes, you don't have to risk being an outcast in order to test your concern. You don't have to scream and yell. You don't have to call others names. The quiet, polite expression of doubt can turn the rest of the group from zombies into thinkers.
I'm David Maxfield,
And I'm Joseph Grenny.
and that's all the BS for today.
So I will hand it off to our co-host, Antoinette Loyola.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. That was great from the behavioral science guys. So what I'm going to talk about now, and we're going to spend some time talking about decision making. There are different parts of the brain that are involved in decision making, including the limbic system, which is the part of our brain responsible for emotional responses, and also the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in rational thinking. And decision making, responsible decision making, is actually one of the 5 core competencies for social emotional learning as well. So let's talk a little bit about the prefrontal cortex. It is not fully developed until, I want to say our children, but until young adults reach 25 years of age. And it involves critical thinking and abstract thought. It's also where our executive functions are. So if you've heard of the term executive functioning, executive function takes place in the prefrontal cortex. And so when we're looking at our prefrontal cortex, we're looking about thinking, planning, solving problems, making decisions, and exerting self-control over impulses. And so that's part of why it's so important when things are affecting our prefrontal cortex. And it's also why sometimes when you have an experience with your teen or someone else's teen and you're literally like, oh, what were they thinking? Their answer is they probably weren't thinking it through, right? And that's because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. A lot of decisions that we make are unconscious and very quickly, right? Think about when you're in a car and you brake. You're usually braking before you even thought that you needed to brake. Or with new cars now, you may be braking before the car tells you to brake. And so what happens with responsible decision making is we're looking at the calculation of potential rewards and potential costs. And teens have unique characteristics that impact this calculation. And the other thing that's very important to know with our prefrontal cortex and addiction is that addiction itself makes changes to the prefrontal cortex. And the way it does it, well, I shouldn't say the way it does it, but the effects of the changes to the brain in addiction are in the areas of impulsivity and compulsivity, right? So not only are they compulsively wanting the drug, they are impulsively making the decision to have the drug. And the thing that's important to know is that there are actual full changes made in the brain when people use drugs and when they become addicted to them. And our teens and adolescents are even more vulnerable, and they're actually the most vulnerable in terms of risk of dependence because they're so young and their brain is still developing. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about dopamine real quick, sorry. Can't forget dopamine, the pleasure hormone, makes people happy, right? How could I forget dopamine? In adolescence, there's a higher number of brain receptors than any other time of our life. So, we would hope our teens would be happy all the time. They have more dopamine receptors. And when there's a reward their brain is going to react more strongly than it would for an adult or even a child, which is another reason why there's a higher risk of dependence when adolescents use drugs. Next slide, please. All right, yes, I'm going to nerd out for a moment here and look at the developing brain. So what happens is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about communication in our brain and the substances that are responsible for that. But one thing I want you to look at here is that, we talked about how there's drastic changes in the brain in adolescence, and especially in the prefrontal cortex. And what you can see there is what they're showing you is the changes to the brain. And part of what causes changes to the brain are the connections. And so when we're making connections in our brain, some things reinforce those connections and some things don't. So I kind of like to think about, when you're playing the piano, right? If you're learning to play the piano, what's going to reinforce the connection? Well, playing the piano over and over and over again, right? Because you're creating that pathway for piano playing. So what happens with drugs is that they can manipulate and create connections that are harmful but efficient. And so the more you use a connection in your brain, the stronger that area of the brain is. It's also something that happens with our students that are exposed to trauma. And when our students are exposed to trauma, it's similar in the fact that the trauma causes students to spend more time in their limbic system, right? And so those connections are stronger than the connections with the prefrontal cortex. And that's why they have a lot of trouble sometimes when they react to things and not, they're reacting to things quickly because that's the connection, the fight, flight, or freeze response in our students that have been exposed to trauma. Those connections are the stronger ones. Those are the more efficient connections. And that's why even when a student is sitting in the class, you have no idea, and all of a sudden that child's having a reaction. So it becomes similar with drugs in that the drugs reinforce certain connections. And unfortunately, the connections that are being reinforced by drugs are harmful connections. And so the drugs are reinforcing these connections, and it's making it harder and lessening the connections for more healthy ways of finding pleasure. Also, addiction diminishes our executive function, our control, and impulsivity management. Next slide, please.
All right, so now that we've discussed some issues of the brain that may put our adolescents more at risk, we wanted to discuss partly what was discussed in the video, right? So when we are trying to make decisions, our brain is involved, and of course our adolescents have different brain characteristics because it's not completely developed in certain parts yet. And then comes in peer pressure, right? So we are all faced with peer pressure, as they noted in the video. None of us are exempt from it, but it's actually just influence wielded by people within the same social group. So it's an influence that we feel to conform to be accepted by a group. So it could be something that's people are either doing on purpose or not on purpose, right? So in that group, there were people that were with the study that were purposely saying the wrong answer. Or it could just be that a social group is placing pressure based on what's happening naturally. But we as people or individuals, and our students as well, if they're in a group and a group is doing something, it can be either a positive or a negative influence to conform to certain things, right? So it could be that they feel pressure to conform, to have good grades, to go to school every day, to study if they're in that type of social group. Or it could be negative, like Nettie was mentioning. If their brain's not developed and they do try, let's say, for example, like you see in the picture, vaping, they may be developing those connections in their brain that makes them more at risk to be addicted to those things because they're using them when their brain is developing. Also, our personalities affect maybe our reaction. So some students may have developed strong leadership skills and they may not be as effective. However, we are all affected by peer pressure at some level, right? So we're all affected by social group dynamics. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, as we've discussed peer pressure, we want to give you some information as to what's going on in the country and also in the South Bay in terms of drugs. We thank Jen Harris, who is our representative from the Behavioral Health Services agency that works with Torrance Unified Schools very closely. And so the next few slides are based strongly on a presentation she made with us earlier this school year, where she indicated that middle school and high school, they've seen nationally that there's been an increase in the use of alcohol, cigarettes, especially among 12th graders. And of course, as you all may know, vaping nicotine, which is tobacco, or also vaping marijuana. Also, there's been an increase in the use of over-the-counter like cough syrups, medicines, inhalants, is younger even for middle school through 10th grade. And unfortunately, also an increase in the use of hallucinogens or LSD. There has been for middle and high school students nationally a decrease in the use of heroin, which is definitely good. Juul, which is a specific type of vaping device, and a very slight decrease in marijuana as well. So that's interesting to note. In the South Bay, some of the drug trends that we see are the use of alcohol, definitely as we see nationally, an increase in the use of vaping products, both tobacco and marijuana, the use of just marijuana itself, not through vaping, and also, unfortunately, the use of prescription drugs and opioids. So those are some of the trends that we are seeing both nationally and across the South Bay. And so what we wanted, I think we're going to hand it back to Nettie to touch a little bit on the brain's pleasure centers in talking about how dopamine affects them. She had mentioned it previously.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how the brain communicates. And I mean, not communicates with the body, but communicates within itself. And so one of the biggest issues with drugs is how they interfere with the way the brain communicates with itself. So I don't want to get too much into details, but what's important to know is that neurons and neurotransmitters are pretty much the way our brain communicates with itself. And drugs interfere with the way these neurons send and receive information. And what's really interesting is that they do them in different ways. So some drugs mimic natural neurotransmitters in our brain, such as marijuana and heroin. I almost said heroin, such as marijuana and heroin. And so although it's mimicking natural neurotransmitters, it's not actually activating it in the same way. So it's sending these abnormal messages in our brains. And like we said earlier, the more we send these messages and make these connections, our brain actually starts to change. Some drugs release abnormally large amounts of natural neurotransmitters and prevent recycling of those, such as amphetamines or cocaine, which is what we have here in our picture. So it shows if we're eating food, it's pleasurable, especially if it's cheesecake or pesto, right? So you see the amount of neurotransmitter release that's on the left while eating food. Well, while you're using cocaine, which hopefully we haven't, but while using cocaine, you will see that it's a lot more neurotransmitters that are released. And so all of this, what it does is this surge of dopamine teaches the brain to seek drugs instead of seeking healthier ways, right? So if you look at that, if I'm eating food and I only get this much dopamine released, right, my feel-good hormone, and then I use cocaine, I get all of these neurotransmitters released, it's going to cause my brain to seek that out, to continue to seek that reaction. Long-term drug use definitely impairs brain function. And like we said earlier, our adolescents are so much more susceptible to it because their brains are still developing. And then next slide, please. We also have a quick film here about how marijuana affects a developing brain.
So because the increase in marijuana use, we thought it would be helpful to share this short little video with you.
You've probably heard that marijuana isn't good for kids, but what does that actually mean? To answer that question, let's take a closer look at the endocannabinoid system to see exactly what it does, what marijuana does to it, and what that does to you.
Spread throughout the brain, the endocannabinoid system is a biological system made up of chemical messengers called endocannabinoids, cellular receptors that communicate with endocannabinoids, and enzymes that break down endocannabinoids after they've delivered their messages.
As endocannabinoids communicate with receptors throughout your body, they create balance and help regulate many body and brain functions, such as helping with memory, coping with stress, pain, and anxiety, and keeping hunger, body temperature, motor coordination, and alertness in balance.
Now let's see what happens when marijuana is introduced into this balancing system. Made from a plant called cannabis, marijuana can be smoked, vaporized, or ingested through food or drink.
Marijuana contains a chemical called tetrahydrocannabinol, also known as THC. Since THC's chemical structure is similar to naturally occurring endocannabinoids, the body allows THC to attach to endocannabinoid receptors in the brain.
When THC enters the body, it overwhelms the endocannabinoid system, attaching to cannabinoid receptors and throwing the body and brain off balance, preventing endocannabinoids in your brain from doing their jobs. Endocannabinoids work like a well-conducted and highly synchronized orchestra, with each one playing at a particular time and place in harmony. When THC is introduced, the precise coordination is lost and thrown off. The endocannabinoids can no longer do their special job. This means your brain will have a harder time regulating all of those functions like memory, coping with stress and anxiety, and motor coordination. Plus, when using marijuana, some people may experience fear, anxiety, paranoia, or memory loss.
Laws allowing medical and recreational use of marijuana for adults are becoming more common in some states, though not in others. But as a young person with a still developing brain, marijuana can have a stronger, more harmful effect on you than adults.
In fact, research has shown that young people who chronically use marijuana, especially highly potent marijuana, increase their risk of cognitive and memory damage, serious mental illnesses like depression and psychosis, and addiction to alcohol or other drugs in adulthood.
Learning the facts can help you make healthy decisions. So say yes to a healthy lifestyle and no to underage marijuana use.
To learn more, visit asklistenlearn.org.
So I just wanted to correct myself. As we were starting the video, I mentioned that there was an increase in marijuana use. I think they did say there was a minor decrease in the use of marijuana, but it is a trend that is seen in the South Bay is marijuana use. So that's why we wanted to share that with you.
And I just want to add one other thing about marijuana that I think is a very important thing to know if you're not already aware of, and that is that marijuana today is a lot stronger than marijuana was in the 70s and early 80s. And I think that's a very important thing to be aware of, so that, you know, if a child if you're a teen or adolescent always says, well, you used it when you were younger, or Uncle so-and-so or grandpa used it when they were younger, the response is, yeah, and it's a lot stronger now. And I mean, looking at least 10 times the effect.
Definitely. I agree. That was one thing they did point out, is to note that the stronger the THC, the more the effect it is. Definitely. So we also wanted to point out, so Jen Harris was able to share with us some really great information on substance use and abuse during COVID-19. So we wanted to make sure we shared that with you as well. There has been an actual increase in substance use and abuse during this time. We can imagine it's a stressful time for all of us. It has also been pretty challenging for people in recovery. So if people have been going to rehab, things have totally changed, as they have for all of us, but it has increased that challenge for them. There has been an increase of opioid overdose deaths as well. Marijuana dispensaries were actually, unfortunately, considered essential at this time, possibly because of their link to some medicinal properties, and so people having licenses to use them medicinally. Also, you may have heard that a lot of agencies have been starting telehealth, so providing services through Zoom or phone calls. to be able to continue care. There are some studies that show it is more effective than in-person care, but it's mostly showing that now they're finding that it's a little bit more effective, but if they've been receiving care prior. So not necessarily for everybody, but if you were in some sort of therapy or something beforehand and you went into telehealth, there are some studies that are showing that telehealth is a little bit more effective. So that's a good thing. But it seems to be more for people who were already in care. As we noted, there's been an increased opioid use and abuse, and hence those increased overdose deaths. Despite the pandemic, we still see that vaping is still on the rise, with reports of new users, sometimes because of the social isolation and missing connections. Students and adults were getting Zoom and online fatigue. And there has been some reports of increased mental health issues that may be co-occurring and causing people to maybe want to use substances and cause that increase. In terms of what's happening in Torrance Unified, we wanted to make sure that we pointed out that yes, we also see the same, that vaping is still happening in the South Bay and Torrance as well as other surrounding communities. Students seem to be very savvy and being able to figure out how to make purchases through social media, through direct messaging, including marijuana. There's a lot more delivery services nowadays and different things that they have been able to work around. Students are reporting smoking on campuses that were not fully open, so maybe like on fields and less visible areas. And also just to keep in mind, we wanted to point out that they are starting to do research on some linkages with vaping and some COVID-19 risks as well, because it affects your breathing and also lungs and maybe other areas of the body. So it may put students more at risk for COVID-19. So that's something we wanted to point out. We also wanted to point out that a new effort that we started is TUSD was awarded the TUPE grant in consortium with LA County Office of Education and other surrounding districts. So they are rolling out a curriculum at all middle schools and high schools in the district. In different grade levels. And they're also, we are rolling out parent workshops for parents. And we wanted to make sure we let you know that there's an upcoming great workshop from Dr. Victor DeNoble, who used to work for the tobacco industry. And he'll be talking about not only the tobacco industry, but also the effects on the brain. So much more specific in terms of scientific research. And he provides a great perspective. So if you're interested, feel free to visit our website so that you can find out when and where that is. It will be a Zoom presentation as well. Oops. Okay. And I'm not sure if this is still me or is that you? Oh, that's you, Nettie.
All right, let's talk about legislation. And as we begin this conversation about legislation, I have to say that in our world today, a lot of times legislation is playing catch up. For example, you know, when we're talking about drugs, I don't know if you've heard of the drug spice and things like that. Well, things get created before the legislation is there to say that they're prohibited, right? And so we wind up with playing catch up a lot. And so California flavor ban, there's a bill that bans all tobacco and vaping products and flavors other than tobacco, mint, menthol, sweet chocolate, etc. It was signed by Governor Newsom in August 2020 to take effect January 1st, 2021. Well, guess what? It's been placed on hold and will be on the ballot in 2022. The tobacco industry has secured $21 million to convince voters to oppose the ban. The other thing that you might notice is that when you're watching TV, I know I've noticed it, I see commercials for Juul and other vaping products, but there's no commercials for cigarettes or tobacco, but there's no commercials for tobacco and cigarettes. And that's because that there has been previous legislation and rules that prohibit and determine where certain things can be advertised and how. Well, guess what? That legislation has not caught up yet with e-cigarettes and vapes and all that kind of stuff. One thing that has happened is that the delivery of vaping products, Congress passed a law signed by our former president to ban the United States delivery of vaping products. So that's a good thing. Online retailers must register with the U.S. Attorney General. They have to verify customer age with a database. They have to use private shipping services, get a signature at delivery, and send a report to the state administrator with the name and addresses of the customer and the quantities and products sold. If they do not comply or register, they could receive penalties as up to 3 years in prison. And beginning March 1st, FedEx will begin prohibiting electronic cigarettes, vaping liquids, and other vaping products in the FedEx global network. Again, a lot of times you may go, well, how is that legal? Well, the answer is the way technology is and science is, things sometimes are created, like these alternative drugs like bath salts and spice. They wind up being created before, and they don't fit into any of the other previous categories or drugs that are listed in other prohibitions and legislations, just like the Juul being advertised on TV. Well, yeah, it's advertised on TV because it's not a cigarette. Next slide, please. How do you deal with peer pressure? I think we all know peer pressure, as that video from that was shown earlier shows. We even feel it as adults. Absolutely 100%. We still feel it as adults. We hope that our prefrontal cortex is well developed and we have good decision-making skills and good enough self-esteem to, say no. But, we do understand how it felt because we were kiddos, once too. So how do we deal with it? One of the most important things is talking to your kids about smoking, drinking, drugs, and relationships. I think we have a myth. A lot of people sometimes think, well, if I talk about it, it's going to give them ideas of what to do. And the reality is it doesn't. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And actually talking about it and letting them know how you feel about those things actually helps. Be a positive influence. What are you modeling with your students and with your children? And know your kids' friends and what they are doing. We sometimes think, oh, go way back in the day. Well, you can't go over the house till I meet the friend. Well, you know what? Until I meet your friend's parents. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a conversation with a parent before your child goes over there. There's nothing wrong with making sure your kiddo went to the mall when they said they were going to the mall. You can track them on the phones. They're under 18. You pay for the cell phone. You can get one of them trackers. Your child actually went to the mall when they say they're going to the mall. Keep the lines of communication open. That is so important. Just letting them know that, I am your parent and I am here for you. And some things are going to be big conversations and you may be making what you think are big decisions, and I'm here to listen. And let them know that, sometimes you're going to come and tell me stuff and I'm just going to listen, as opposed to thinking about what your consequence is. Also, help them plan ahead. Teach them, right? We talk about how responsible decision making is part of one of the social emotional learning competencies because it is so important to our overall well-being, right? And so teach them how to make good decisions. Teach them about weighing pros and cons. Give them possible scenarios and say, how would you say no in this situation? What would you say in this situation? Because sometimes what happens with our students is they respond because they don't know what to do, right? I used to always say, and this is me, my mom said I can't. My mom said no. And let them know, hey, use me as the bad guy anytime you want. Tell them I'll say no. Tell them you're going to get in trouble if you do it. That's okay. And plan, like I said, plan excuses. Oh no, I have a baseball game that day. If they play baseball, maybe they don't have a game, but maybe that's a great excuse for them, right? Not that we want to teach them lying, but I think that coming up with ideas and ways to get out of that peer pressure and still keeping their social status of where they're at is very, very, very important. And again, I always say, blame your parent. I can't. They'd kill me if they found out. They track my phone. Next slide, please.
So we have here, we always like to end our presentations with some great resources for you to use. And of course, we want to, before I mention these larger resources that are available through the district, I want to make sure that you're, being aware of what's available at your school site. So first and foremost, if there's an issue or if you want questions or you have questions or you want to discuss, like Nettie said, how to deal with peer pressure, how to come up with scenarios to help your child plan. If you're having some resistance or if you need help, there are school counselors on all school sites that might be able to help have those discussions with you and give you some advice or give you guidance on where to look and what would be helpful, and maybe even help you have some of those conversations with your kids and give you insight, or maybe talk to your kid on campus. We also have school site therapists that are on site at our middle school and high schools, in addition to counselors, which might be also helpful if your child needs somebody to talk to. So that might be a good thing. And as part of TUPE, we also have, for students who are caught vaping or with tobacco products or substances of any kind on campus, or if they get a direct referral from families even, we might be able to have her see. We have a licensed marriage family therapist who's available to go out to school sites to see students, and she's been trained in brief intervention for drug substance use that could be really helpful for students as well. So those are some great resources. We are part of Building Bridges and Student Services, and we have a great referral system. So even if you didn't want it on school site, or if somebody you knew of at the school, you don't want it to be during the day because of whatever reason, they're in sports, there's classes they don't want to miss, we can refer students out to outside agencies so that they could either come on campus or you could see them after school, or on your own free time, whichever is most convenient. So those are some great resources to start with. But we also would like to tout that we always look for the silver lining. So this year has been obviously an extremely virtual year for all of us because of COVID. But as a result, we created what we think will continue to stay here as a great resource for us as we move forward. We've created the TUSD Virtual Wellness Center, which is a website that you can access through our TUSD website. And you can actually go to the different tiles that you see here when you get there. There's one that has apps you can download to your phone to provide cool meditation and wellness or breathing or even exercise or nutrition apps that are helpful to be able to embed wellness into our lives and not make it a big hassle for us. So the apps can kind of handle that organization piece. There's a tile on creativity, music, breathing and meditation, like I mentioned, exercise, journaling. There's some great ideas there. Health and nutrition, which is always important. It looks like puzzles and games to stimulate our brain and distract us. And me and Nettie's favorite part, the animal tile. So if you click on the animal tile, there are great resources to watch animal cams, to watch soothing videos of animals like a jellyfish with relaxing music. That's very helpful. And at the
I will warn you, if you watch the puppy cams, you will want to get a puppy. So if you're worried about wanting to get a puppy, do not watch the puppy cams.
Very true, definitely. I know I watched the other ones and now I want a koala. So I can definitely say that that is true.
And it is very relaxing watching a baby panda sleep.
Yes. So very cute. And it's good for a good mental brain break. With all of these Zooms and different things going on, it can be a good brain break. It could be a good exercise break for us to keep moving. We're all sitting down a lot more and sedentary. So it can be really helpful to kind of fit in a short workout. There's also a tab here, Building Bridges. If you click on that, it takes you to some of the resources that I'll be mentioning right now. And also, if you see the tab here with the kids, if you click on that, you will go to the same categories, but we've put them by age group so that if you're specifically looking for like mindfulness for a younger child or specific things that are better for a younger child, you could click there for them. Most of them are good for all, but there are a couple that are more specifically geared to younger students. We also want to remind you that a great partner that we have is TUSD Families Connected. It's linked to the resource South Bay Families Connected. And if you click on the logo, it will take you to that website and it will show you a lot of different resources that provide information on wellness, on substance abuse, on they have a speaker series where they have people do presentations. This year has been mostly virtual, but in the past they have been in person in different areas throughout the South Bay. They've done one here. They've done them in Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach. So they rotate around the South Bay. So if you're interested, you can click there. Also on the other side, we have a great partner that we have as well, Care Solace, which is it's basically what I would consider a Google for mental health. So it's not just Google. If you go to Google and search for a therapist, you get thousands and thousands of responses, and there's no way to know like what's better or what's not. And that's actually why they created Care Solace, to provide vetted resources which are trusted by the school district to USD families, and you can look for access to resources that also take your insurance. So it's not only just for mental health, but also for substance abuse treatment, or both. So either one, just one of them, or both together. When you first get there, it asks you, what type of service you're looking for. So if it has a whole drop-down menu of different things like anxiety, grief, different things related to mental health, depression, and then it also asks if there are any issues regarding substance use, so possibly inhalants or substance use in general. Tobacco, lots of different things. And then it asks you what your insurance is so that it can hook you up with a great trusted resource that takes your insurance and doesn't have a waiting list. And when we talk about trusted, we only provide agencies that are not tied up with a lot of lawsuits, that don't have pending litigation, that don't have their license removed. We want to make sure that they're not problematic agencies, so that you're going somewhere that you trust and that we know doesn't have these problems in their background. So we just wanted to make sure you were aware of that so that you could access any of these resources at any time. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Nidhi, before I finish? I don't think she has anything else to add about Care Solace, but know that they do have resources in terms of specific people that can help walk you through the process. So that's why we chose Care Solace as a partner, was because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just you searching and trying to make those connections. Once you connect to Care Solace, you can go online and have a video chat with them, and they will call the agency and make sure which one you're more comfortable with and get you an intake appointment, and make sure that you can actually get in for an appointment at a certain time, make sure they take your insurance like we mentioned. You can do that via email, you can do that via phone, or like I mentioned, a video chat with them. So they will follow up with you and handhold you through the process. So that's why we chose that agency. So we just wanted to make sure you were aware of all of these great resources. And if you have a moment, feel free to visit our TUSD Virtual Wellness Center. Let me see if I click on it to see if it works. There you go. So here is the Virtual Wellness Center. Once you click on it, as we mentioned, here are the tiles, and you can click on any of them to get them. As I said, our favorite tile is the animals, so I will show you that one. But as I mentioned, there are quite a few tiles there for a brain break, for wellness, to be able to focus. It's a great avenue for you to use at any time so that you can relax and take that time to care for yourself. So I clicked on the pandas, but it's taking a bit of a moment to get there. And there you go. So it will take you to the specific video that's here. This one. And this one is about, looks like 3 hours. So you can take 2 minutes, 1 minute, or 3 hours to use as background focus music, whatever you choose. So returning to our presentation, that will probably conclude our presentation for today. We just wanted to make sure we thanked you for your time, and feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.